Welcome back. Democrat and Republican leaders are hoping to stop a government shutdown with an 11th hour meeting at the White House today. President Trump says both parties are at a deadlock and thousands of federal workers may lose their jobs permanently because of it. Michael LaRosa and Leslie Sanchez can help us understand this. Michael is a partner at the government relations firm Ballard Partners and the former press secretary to First Lady Jill Biden. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist. A warm welcome to you both. I want to start with this because our chief Washington analyst, Robert Costa, spoke with President Trump about the potential shutdown, and he shared what Trump had to say on Face the Nation. Let's play that.
A shutdown looks likely at this point, based on my conversation this morning with President Trump. Inside the White House, sources are saying President Trump actually welcomes a shutdown in the sense that he believes he can wield executive power to get rid of what he calls waste, fraud, and abuse.
Leslie, help us understand that. Why might a shutdown be perceived as good for the president?
I think it's more of a context, just talking to Republican sources. I don't hear a big appetite for a Republican-led shutdown. I think what there is a conversation around is getting a control around spending, and that's something the president has talked about consistently. There is talk in this Congress about the rising debt. There is already passage of the appropriations bills, and they feel that the president going to Capitol Hill today is really going to put the pressure on the Democrats to come to a baseline agreement. You hear this talk about increasing, there's going to be cuts on health care and not managing the debt. And I think it's really the president's language around trying to put pressure to come to an agreement and having a budget resolution and at least a debt consolidation, no increased spending, part of that conversation.
And the White House has a memo suggesting that, unlike previous shutdowns where workers are temporarily let go, there could be a permanent reduction in the workforce. Thousands of federal workers could lose their jobs. Michael, should that at all change the strategy for the Democrats? Does it put pressure on them to come to a deal?
I think it probably does. I mean, that was why Senator Schumer voted to keep the government open in March in the first place. But what's interesting about negotiating with President Trump, and the reason why I think it's really smart that Schumer and Jeffries will be there finally, is that he's pretty unpredictable when it comes to these situations. And I'm sure that's not necessarily making Speaker Johnson and Leader Thune very happy. But I think what they're going to emphasize that maybe the president isn't really dialed into is the tidal wave of healthcare cuts that are coming that, Republicans will be blamed for. And one is premiums in general are going up soon as November 1st. And that was already announced months ago. The second thing is the Medicaid cuts that we've already seen from the big, beautiful bill, the Medicaid cuts that are closing rural hospitals in a lot of areas around the country. And third are these Obamacare subsidies that, while they don't expire till the end of the year, the fact that we're not going to get a deal on them now means that open enrollment comes November 1st. We're going to miss that deadline, and the markets are going to be pretty disturbed. And Republicans are going to have to take the blame for a lot of this.
And, these are things really impacting all Americans. I want to jump over to one other big topic, because last week the Trump administration indicted James Comey for allegedly making a false statement and for obstructing justice. I want to play for you what Vice President J.D. Vance said about this topic on Fox.
Well, there's certainly going to be more indictments coming over the next 3.5 years. So we're not letting politics drive this. We're letting the requirements of the justice system and the law drive this. And unfortunately for James Comey, when I look at this indictment, I see a guy who lied under oath.
Leslie, the president publicly put pressure on his attorney general to target several critics, including Comey. And this was days before the indictment. It's the precise thing he accused Democrats of doing when he was running, using the mechanisms of government for political purposes against enemies. How can the administration show it's not politically motivated revenge?
I think that the truth is going to be in these indictments, right? Like, fundamentally, what the Vice President Vance is talking about is there are layers upon layers of consistent proof that Comey was not telling the truth, that he fabricated evidence. And I think with that, there's this conversation that there's going to be more indictments to him and a lot of his allies. I don't know if you can call that just putting political pressure on the justice system if you're laying out an indictment that needs to go through the judicial process. But what the president has been very clear about is the idea of targeting political enemies, as the way the president feels he has been targeted by the justice system, by the court system, that he's going to illuminate. And I think what voters are seeing is more transparency around that, or more sunlight around that, and they can make a decision for that themselves and let it go through the judicial process.
And Michael, what and how can Democrats defend against that?
Until we take back at least one control of a branch of government, or half of a branch of government, like taking back the House, there's not much we can do about it. And I certainly take the vice president at his word that more indictments are in fact coming. In regards to Comey, I think, while I'm not a lawyer by any stretch of the means or a legal expert, I've seen analysis from the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, and all over the political spectrum that this is a very weak indictment, and that while it's very rare to get indictments and trials dismissed out of hand, if there is ever a case for a judge to dismiss these charges before trial, this could be it.
We'll watch this closely, of course. Michael LaRosa and Leslie Sanchez, great to see you this Monday. Thanks for being with us.
Thank
you.